Hello everyone, this is Pal Ponder on Weather. In this update, we're going to go over my preliminary thoughts on this upcoming winter ahead. Welcome back everyone, how's it going? I appreciate all my followers out there and my new followers. So if you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns on North America and the tropics, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and notification bell to get all my daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's get right to it. The overall climate update, and we've been dealing with this LaNina since 2020, and that's going to be a main influence on this upcoming winter ahead, because it's still expected to be a continue LaNina all the way through fall and the winter months, depicted on this blue shaded area here. About a 90% chance this actually continues all the way through the fall months, and even a pretty good shot this continues all the way through winter. So we have less than a 5% chance that this would actually flip to a El Nino pattern. But at some point around February, March, or April timeframe, it is supposed to level off and become more of an Enzo look. But we should be still influenced with a LaNina for the next 6 months. In fact, here's the latest update on September the 10th. We do in fact actually have a moderate LaNina. So we've been having a fairly decent LaNina, and that's actually continuing to intensify as we speak, and I think it actually gets a little bit stronger, bottoming out sometime in November or December timeframe before I think it goes back up to more neutral stance by the time we get into spring of 2023. So this has been rare. We are in rare territory. In fact, the last time we had what they call a triple dip LaNina is all the way back here since 1999, 2000, and 2001. That's been 22 years, folks. And then you have to go all the way back to 1974, 75, 76. So it's only happened twice in recorded history. And this will be the third time that we've had 3 LaNinas winners back to back to back. So what does all that mean going forward? So here's your typical LaNina, kind of, again, what we experienced really the last 2 winters, as this Pacific jet down in the southern branch overall predominantly means drier than average. So you tend to have drier spells in California, all the way through the deserts, through Texas. Much of the deep south typically brings much drier than average conditions, where the polar jet essentially lives further to the north. That brings down that cooler air mass. You have the atmospheric river continuing for the Pacific Northwest, and these traverse across portions of the Ohio Valley, and this section of the country is typically a little bit more wetter than average. So going forward for the next 46 days, we've had a well above average temperature anomalies for summer, right? And I think that actually continues for a good chunk of fall. For the next 46 days, I am expecting overall a little bit of a cool down for our western states. So I do feel we're going to be having the ridge a little bit less prevalent out here in our western regions, while we do have the central and eastern 2/3 of the U.S. predominantly above average between now and say the end of October. And as far as the precipitation goes, I think we're going to get a little bit of a bump up in the tropics heading into October, at least higher than average precipitation anomalies back into the Caribbean, and highlighting again portions of Florida. What's interesting is where the Eastern Pacific is continuing to remain active, and we may bring systems close enough again for Southern California, in combination with the Western Trough out here, could bring above average precipitation for portions of Southern California. Now, it doesn't take much to get above average, but I do feel we'll have more opportunities for portions of California for the next 6 weeks, as long as this Eastern Pacific runway, if you will, as far really active storm time continues. And I feel that will continue, and then combining with these troughs that come in will definitely bring more opportunities for above average precipitation for a good chunk of the west and the Pacific Northwest, while the midsection of the country will remain high and dry. I think you're definitely going back to a drier pattern in portions of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas for the midsection of the country. And then we'll have more of a La Nina type pattern slowly start to evolve and have more above average precipitation anomalies for portions of the upper Midwest going through the portions of the Ohio Valley, but then drier towards the coastline into the Northeast. So as far as, let's look at the snow, because I'm really not expecting like Arctic outbreaks for the next 46 days, but I do expect it's going to be having some cold shots where we could be getting some of those higher elevation snows. So yeah, I'm looking for snowfall totals in portions of Montana, back into Idaho, back into Wyoming. That could filter into portions of the Rocky Mountains. Mainly, these are all high elevation snows between now and say the end of October. So, but yeah, I'm not expecting anything in between. Any snow that we do get, I am expecting it to be more of a high elevation snow. So going forward into November, I think it still remains above average for a good chunk of the country. Now, this isn't like blowtorch or anything like that. You're talking some average and 1 or 2 degrees above average, but predominantly, for the most part, we are going to have some cold shots, but we're going to be rebounding quickly. Typically, when you have La Ninas, right, what we've been experiencing, it tends to favor a little bit more extreme type weather, more, droughts, floods, rapid warm-ups, cool downs. We're going to have a lot of roller coaster type temperatures, right? So we're going to have cold shots, but then once the winds turn around, we're going to have a rebounding pretty quickly. So these will be quick hits of cold spells through the fall months. But I do feel we are going to be getting some cold shots, but not like sustainable cold shots for any extended colder time frames. So, but then let's take a look at the overall sea surface anomalies, because man, these are really elevated, right? I mean, this warm blob out here into the north central Pacific. We've got a lot of warmer conditions. The tropics has almost been next to nothing this year. We've only had 5 named storms, so we don't have much upwelling in the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, down here off the East Coast. We have well above average temperature anomalies. Where the La Nina is alive and prevalent is down here further to the south, where you see all that blue shaded area. And look at those darker blues. That is an indication of that moderate La Nina in place. And I do think this actually probably intensifies a little bit further as we get deeper into the fall months before it maxes out sometime in November or December timeframe. So if you take a look at some of the sea surface anomalies for where we are now and kind of put it all together, we have to count the last 2 years, because we've been in a predominantly La Nina. And for the most part, I do feel the winter ahead is going to have a lot of characteristics than what we experienced the last 2 winters, right? But if we also include 2014, 2013, 2005, you come up with a similar type sea surface anomalies than we did in those 5 analog years. So if you combining all that, I feel going forward into your December, January, February, precipitation anomalies, I think we're going to be making that transition into more of that typical La Nina type, where we have the atmospheric river remains alive and prevalent predominantly for a good chunk of the winter months, with those well above average precipitation anomalies coming in for Washington, Oregon, and northern California, and then weakening once it gets in the northern parts of the central US, and then above average precipitation for a good chunk of the Ohio Valley and northern parts of the Northeast, while the southern tier is remaining more high and dry. So you're going to get rain shots, but overall, for those 3 months, you should be on average, below average precipitation for a good chunk of the deep south. But if you include February, which I feel like we're going to have a well above average December and have more of a later type winter this year. So I feel like we're going to have a precipitation anomalies well above average for the good chunk of the Northwest, but then hinting at a little bit higher precipitation anomalies with more snow events happening later in February, especially into March, for a good chunk of the Northeast, while again, the southern flank, indicative of that La Nina continuing to remain in place for the next 6 months, will remain overall, on average, below average precipitation anomalies. Now, what's going to be prevalent going forward is going to be your polar vortex, your displacements. So last year, typically here's a strong polar vortex. So when it's strong, it remains compact in a circle. It's up in the Arctic, and that colder air doesn't really get displaced further south. But typically, when it starts to buckle, when you have some sort of like kind of waviness in the polar vortex, now that sends cold Arctic air plunging southward. Now, last year, we had 7 displacements over time, right? We had quick cold shots of Arctic blast coming into the United States with 7 different displacements. We never technically got a polar vortex split. Now, we also got a sudden stratospheric warming event, but it wasn't until the middle of March, and we got all that colder air because it came from the stratosphere, and it took a couple of weeks to filter down, and that's why we had that later winter in April into May. I think we get that sudden stratospheric warming event a lot like we got in that 2019 winter with the upper Midwest. I feel like that's going to come on but sometime in January, and we're really feeling the effects into February. So looking at the snowfall totals for last year, so this is what we ended up with, where all the snow fell across the U.S. And I feel, again, with this LaNina continuing to remain in place last year and this year, I really don't see overall that many differences between last year and this year's overall kind of snow setup a good chunk of the South. I feel like we are going to be getting some snow in Texas further south, but I don't think it's going to reach, any further south than that. And that's ultimately what I feel like going forward, that it's not going to be overall like drastic changes from what we saw from, last year and the year before with this winter. So if we put all the pieces of the puzzle together and taking those 5-year anomalies, we're matching those sea surface temperatures where we are now back in the last 20 years, we come up with this. Now, granted, the last 7 out of 10 Decembers have been well above average. Last year, we had a pretty much well above average, if not record temperatures for even good chunk of Texas, right? I feel like we are going to have another well above average December coming up for this winter. So we'll have some below average temperature anomalies, but it's mainly going to be predominantly confined well to the north and then well below average further south, as long as we don't have like a really, really active October in the hurricane front. Now, if we do with the kind of the fly in the ointment, sometimes I showed you all those sea surface temperature anomalies because I'm doing this video like September the 11th, right? So we still got a good 6 weeks, 7 weeks left of hurricane season. Sometimes if you do have a very active hurricane season on in October with have several U.S. impacts, that can influence and bring some of those lower sea surface anomalies closer to the coast and can influence some of the weather going forward, which might alter the December. So this is a kind of a flying in the ointment. And we saw that back in 2000, right? It was back in the 2000. That was the last time we had the triple dip of LaNina, 99, 2000, 2001. So we have to kind of look at that analog. If we do have an active, season beyond this for the tropics, we could be looking at a little bit earlier type setup with those displacements of the polar vortex, a lot like we had in 2000. And if that were to happen, that would bring much colder conditions for a good chunk of the central and eastern 2/3 of the country in December. Now, I'm not expecting this. I am expecting well above average temperature anomalies. So the caveat is, if we do have, I feel like a really active hurricane season with several U.S. hits in October, then I'm thinking I'm leaning more towards a much colder December than what I'm forecasting right now. So, but beyond that, in January, I do feel we're going to have more of a negative EPO type setups. And I think we're going to have more of a transition with, above average temperatures for a good chunk of the West and the northern states, while we have that negative EPO having a cooler shots, more the colder shots essentially aligned into the central and predominantly the east, 2/3 of the US and parts of the southeast as well. But going into February, I do feel we'll have that sudden stratospheric warming event sometime in January, which will feel the effects going into February, which will bring a much colder, probably the coldest time of the year, and more, elongation of cold spells into the United States, with those sudden stratospheric warming events happening, with all that polar vortex happening sometime in February. And I think the main alignment with that system, a lot like we had in 2019, January 30th, 31st, that January 19th event, I think we'll have something similar that could be on the table coming up for this particular winter in this February. So, but beyond that, going into March, like I said, I feel like the seasons overall, have shifted, and I've been feeling like this for the last 10 years, have shifted past about a month. So I think that's why we've seen such higher temperature anomalies in December and have some of these later winters. And I do feel like we're going to have a later winter again. So we're going to have a really cold, a predominantly colder February, and then that coldness will last into March as well, and probably going into April. So it's more I'm predicting more of a later type winter this year, with a well above average temperatures for December. And again, the caveat would be, if we do have an active hurricane season, then I'm leaning, going forward, I would lean more towards a colder December. So, and then the Pioneer model's kind of depicting up on that as well. So I like this model as far as a longer range type setup, with the main cold shots, the highest snow anomalies and the highest probability for your coldest temperatures would predominantly be in the upper Midwest and good chunk of the Ohio Valley this year, with those that stratospheric warming event really taking shape, especially as we go into that February timeframe. So, hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely leave your comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel to catch the latest update, where I protect you before and after the storm.